Welcome to Testify. Today we dive into the book of Zechariah. Zechariah is written after the return of the exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem. Zechariah and Haggai together challenged the people to rebuild the temple and look for the fulfillment of God's promises. Long ago, Jeremiah, the prophet, said that Israel's exile would last for 70 years, and that afterwards God would restore his presence to a new temple. That's when God would bring his kingdom, and the rule of the Messiah over all nation. This book tells us that the 70 years were almost up, but life back in the land was hard, and it seemed like none of these hopes were ever going to be fulfilled. The book of Zechariah offers an explanation about what went wrong. Zechariah chapter 1 verse 1 to 6. A challenge to repent. The book begins with Zechariah's challenge to his generation to turn back to God and not act like their ancestors who refused to listen to the earlier prophets. That rebellion is what landed them in exile. The people's response to Zechariah was ideal, as they repented and humbled themselves before God, or so it seemed. Zechariah chapter 1 verse 7 to chapter 6 verse 15. Dream visions on exile and rebuilding. Zechariah's first vision is about 4 horsemen, who are like rangers patrolling the world on God's behalf. They represent God's attentive watch over the nations, and their report is that the world is at peace. In Zechariah's day, God raised up Persia to conquer Babylon and bring relative peace. The second and seventh visions are paired as reflections on Israel's past sin that led to the exile. The second vision is about 4 horns that symbolize the nations that attacked and scattered Israel. Like Assyria and Babylon, those empires were themselves scattered by Persia. The matching seventh dream is about a woman in a basket. We're told that she is a symbol of the centuries of Israel's covenant rebellion, and she is promptly carried to Babylon by other women with stork wings. The third and sixth visions are paired as they both focus on the rebuilding of a new Jerusalem. The third dream depicts a man measuring the city. It's an image of God's promise that Jerusalem will be rebuilt and become a beacon to the nations who will join God's people in worship. In the sixth vision, a scroll flies around the New Jerusalem, punishing thieves and liars, the idea being that the New Jerusalem is a place purified from sin by the Scriptures. The fourth and fifth visions are at the center of the dream section. They are about the 2 key leaders among the returned exiles, Joshua, the high priest, and Zerubbabel, a royal descendant of David. Joshua was symbolically wearing Israel's sin in the form of dirty clothes, but in the fourth dream those are taken off, and he's given new clean clothes, and a turban as a symbol of God's grace. An angel tells Joshua that if he remains faithful to God, he will lead his people and become a symbol of the future messianic king. The fifth vision is of 2 olive trees that supply oil to an elaborate gold lamp. The lamp is a symbol of God's watchful eye over his people, while the 2 trees symbolize the anointed leaders Joshua and Zerubbabel, who are leading the temple rebuilding efforts. God says, however, that success won't come to the new temple if these 2 are not dependent on the work of God's Spirit. The dreams conclude with a short bonus vision from Zechariah. Joshua the priest is given a crown, and is presented as a symbol of the future Messiah, who will also be a priest in God's kingdom. However, Zechariah says, all this will be fulfilled only if the current generation is faithful to God, and obeys the terms of the covenant. Altogether, these 3 visions emphasize how the coming of the Messianic kingdom is conditional upon this generation becoming faithful to God. Zechariah chapters 7 to 8. Invitation to participate in God's kingdom. This leads up to the conclusion of the dream vision. A group of Israelites come, and they have been mourning over the former temple's destruction for nearly 70 years. They ask, should we stop grieving? Is God's kingdom coming soon? In response, Zechariah again reminds them of how their ancestors rejected God's call through the prophets, which led to the exile. He repeats this ancient prophetic challenge in chapter 8. This generation will see the Messianic kingdom, but only if they pursue justice and peace and remain faithful to the covenant. In other words, Zechariah reverses their question and asks, will you become the kinds of people who are ready to receive and participate in God's coming kingdom? The question is left hanging as the people don't answer, and the book just moves on. Zechariah chapter 9 to 14. Images of the Messianic kingdom. The final section describes the coming of a humble messianic king riding a donkey into the New Jerusalem to establish God's kingdom over the nations. The king is then symbolized as a shepherd over the flock of Israel. He is rejected by his own people and their leaders, who are also symbolized as shepherds. The chapter concludes with the New Jerusalem as the gathering point for all the nations. The city becomes a new Garden of Eden, with a river of living water flowing out of the temple to bring healing to all creation. And that's where the book ends. The future kingdom of the book's second half will only come when God's people are faithful to the covenant, as the first half made clear. That brings us to the end. Join us for more.